Hey everybody, good morning and welcome to our special season of Abolitionist Lent Bible Study. This Lenten season, we are building on what we did in Advent to invite people across traditions and mediums to explore themes of revelation, disruption, examination, and embodiment in ways that support a larger faith movement, reimagining restorative solutions to community safety, health, and wellness. And by abolition, we mean not just the closing of prisons and ending of policing, though we do mean that, but also putting in place the vital systems of support that many communities are systematically disenfranchised from. Abolitionist Lent is a collaborative vision, a collaborative project between some organizations and some thought leaders, including organizations of Fellowship of Reconciliation, More Light, and the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, and thought partners, including Reverend Lindsey Anderson, who's with us today, Miles Markham, Minister Candace Simpson, and Reverend Ananda Barclay. So we invite you to join us throughout the Lenten season as we define, explore, and reflect and take action to further the inbreaking of abolition into the world. Today, I'm so excited to have a special guest back and our thought partner for Abolitionist Lent, Reverend Lindsey Anderson, to explore the theme of anger in John chapter 2, verses 13 to 22, Jesus in the temple at the money changers table. Welcome, Lindsey. We're so glad to have you. And before we dive into this text, I invite you to introduce your name, your pronouns, your work and identities, because we know those are with us whether we're talking about abolition or exploring the Bible.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. I'm so glad to be here. And good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, whenever you watch this. I am Lindsey Anderson, and my pronouns are she, her, and I currently live and work in the beautiful city of Detroit. It is beautiful today. The weather is finally broken, the cold weather. And I am here in Detroit. I'm the co-pastor of Love Rising Lutheran Church, which is a proud Black Lutheran congregation. And I have been there for about 7 years working with those folks, and just love them so much. I am from Southeast Michigan. I am home here. This is where I'm from. And my experience growing up here as a mixed race woman of color, in all the things that are Metro Detroit, inform a lot of the work that I do. Excuse me. I do a lot of side work around issues of anti-racism and deconstructing white supremacy. And I do that work, all of that work, standing in the legacy of my ancestors who were Black, Indigenous, and white folks. And with the communities that raised me, those communities that raised me. I am a cis hetero person in the world, and I try to carry that privilege responsibly. And I'm so happy for partners like you and my friends at More Light who are willing to walk with me in grace. So that's who I am. That's what I'm bringing into the room today. And excited to talk about abolition, both for my loved ones I know who are affected by the policing and prison system, and my community, whom it victimizes and terrorizes, and myself, because I want to get free too. And that's why we're doing this work.
Amen. Thank you, my friend. It is a joy to get to journey together in these conversations and the work for liberation across identities and across our world. As y'all know, I'm Alex Patchin McNeill. My pronouns are he, him. And Lindsey, I really appreciate you naming the legacy of those who have brought us to this moment. And I'm, as a white transgender man born and raised in the South, I call upon the legacy of my grandparents, my mother's family that especially embodied themes of abolition and resistance to segregation in Oklahoma and Louisiana, and my other white kin who didn't, who grappled with that in ways of their kind of living out where they were in different parts of North Carolina. So I appreciate that. And I also root here in North Carolina, a place that I was born and raised and moved away from, thinking I had to escape all the things, and realizing, nope, all those questions about racism, heterosexism, homophobia, transphobia, they just are everywhere, and they come with you no matter where you are. And so coming back here to root in a place that I think needs to be and is grappling with those questions from where we are. And so I have the pleasure of serving as More Light's executive director, where we envision liberation, not just for LGBTQ folks, but what does it mean for us to get free from the shame that has bound us, that is not from God, both in our churches and in our world. And I think abolition, as we talked about it in our planning team, one of the pieces that has been so powerful in keeping us in our own mental and physical prisons is the shame of how we're a society's construction of what our bodies are supposed to be and do. And one of the pieces of abolition is trying to remove that shame and work around it, work it with it, examine it. So I don't know, I think this text might have something to say to us about that. So I'm excited to dig in.
Yes.
Whew, we got a doozy. So I'm excited to read this text, John chapter 2, verses 13 to 22, 3 different times, and we'll ask different questions as we read. But the first question that we ask is really a noticing. What stands out to us as we hear it? And Lindsey, I would invite you to read it for us for the first time.
Sure. Turning my pages, you all can't see, but
yes.
So I'm reading the NRSV version of John 2, starting at chapter 13, or verse 13 of chapter 2. I'm going to keep drinking my coffee and get back.
Just keep it. It's morning. We welcome.
Yes. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken.
I'm curious what you noticed in this reading of the text.
I think for me, I was struck first by when Jesus says, "Stop making my Father's house a marketplace," by the word marketplace. And I think in other, I don't know if it's other translations or in other gospels, I just remember in my memory, what Jesus says is that this is supposed to be a house of prayer. But I think in this gospel, the word marketplace for me puts a different flavor on it. And, you know, I think highlights for me that the problem is this buying and selling capitalist business mentality. It really is more convicting around that piece, which is so a part of our modern culture, right? And so it just highlighted the calling out of that in ways that I had not noticed before.
Yeah, he's not obscuring. This is supposed to be a house of prayer, like putting the emphasis on what it's supposed to be, but instead naming the problem.
Right. And that the problem is so closely tied to like this idea of doing business, making money. I think often in my formation, often the problem that was named here was that that people, that this was a system that was putting a price tag on God's grace, right? And that like it was equating God's grace with something that could be bought and sold. But a lot of those interpretations didn't go on to say, like, let's talk about our big problem with buying and selling in general. Like, let's talk about what the problematic nature of capitalism and how that has taken over our Christian faith, right? It was never like, maybe we should rethink the whole way, our whole stance on money as the church. It was like, oh, let's just make sure that individuals know that the grace of God is free for them. Ain't nothing else free in the world.
Yeah,
but
you have to pay for it all.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that just struck me off the bat.
I think that's so powerful. And what struck me, I really had a moment when I was like, wait a minute, is this really John 2? Is this the second chapter of John? I had to look it up. I went to various sources to be like, wait a minute, did the source I was using miss something? It was supposed to be John 12 or 22 in the 22nd chapter. And it made me realize that all the other gospels that have this story they make it the final Passover before Jesus's death. It's like, this is the culminating action. But to have John place it here at the beginning of Jesus's ministry, to me, goes to your point of just how foundational this story is for who Jesus is. And it's not the last thing Jesus notices about the temple, it's the first thing. And it's then a theme that's going to carry throughout his ministry, particularly in the Gospel of John. But what if we imagine this at the beginning of Jesus's ministry across the Gospels? And what would that say? Not just that grace is free and everything else, all others pay cash. Right. But actually that we're questioning the heart of how some of our institutional religious practices have been constructed.
Yeah, and I mean, in the book of John, right, Jesus' first two like highlighted public things, he turns water into wine, and then he turns over the tables, which what an awesome, like, liberating party Jesus. Who doesn't want that Jesus? Like, come on, y'all. But yeah, I think you're right that like this is setting up the foundation of the Gospels aren't laid out like they are by mistake, right? Like there's intention, and I think that part of this intention for the writer of John is like, this is important. Take note, carry this with you, read the rest through this lens.
Yeah, this is kind of like we started, like, let's introduce ourselves and our identities. These are Jesus's identities as almost reimagining what faith can look like. And what do we have faith in? Is it in order? Is it in a building? Or is our faith premised on something else? I really think that the kind of metaphor of the temple, like I'm the temple, is an interesting shifting of what we prioritize in turn, or like lift up as a true expression of faithfulness. I was really struck by we've been working on this temple for 46 years. I made me wonder, like, why in the world have we been working on this for 46 years? But at the same time, how many of our church buildings feel like they've been under construction for 46 years?
Mm-hmm.
Like never ending improvements, never ending crap to fix, never ending, the boiler exploded, etc. And how much upkeep we have to, how much money we have to dump into these buildings.
Yeah.
And do we do that at the neglect of the body?
I just want that question to hang in the, do we? Yeah, I mean, I think for, certainly if anything has been highlighted for us this year, right? It's the sort of foolishness of spending so much time and energy on these buildings, which we have now had to leave. And, you know, have been revealed as not the heart of the ministry, the gospel, our call. Yeah.
Our buildings are not our essential employees.
Exactly. Yep. And if y'all won't listen to Jesus in the Gospel of John, maybe you can have lived experience that will give us wisdom. Maybe we all can.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are really liberative and powerful ways to nurture the physical temples that we gather in, ways to reframe that space as not just for a select few, but for the wider community. And I think what we are invited in as abolitionists, as those envisioning abolition, is to envision or imagine what could the purpose of a church be if it was actually truly connected to its community. That's not a universal, everyone must now sell their building, everyone must now do the exact same thing. But that question to me shifts from how are we going to steward this temple to its like perfection, in terms of it will never have any boiler issues. It will have the most beautiful roof and courtyard, which I believe an upkeep of a building, if we're going to do it, that's important. We can't have a building that's going to like fall on somebody. But at the same time, to the neglect of what do the bodies who embody this space need, and what temples of bodies are we ignoring when we're pouring millions of dollars into a single structure?
Yeah, and even our like metrics for how we decide what good stewardship looks like, right? Maybe the neighborhood church has like old carpeting that turns you off or makes you think that they're not taking care of their building, but actually they've been spending their money on community supports, on a after school program, or, you know, hosting, being good partners, interfaith partners in the community, right? Like, I think sometimes in addition to being obsessed with our own beautification projects, right, we judge others by what we can see, or by our standard of what it means to take care of something.
One of the reasons I love this text is because Jesus gets angry and isn't ashamed of his anger at what he sees. And I think that's an interesting, like Jesus as an emotion, like as emoting, having an emotion, having a feeling, I think is an interesting mirror around. Often I think we want to paint Jesus as like the calm one, the like grounded one. He doesn't get ruffled when someone challenges him, or he doesn't get annoyed when people ask him dumb questions. But here Jesus is very clearly angry at the desecration of this sacred space, and what he can, like, the misvaluing of what is actually sacred, perhaps, but like bringing like centering capitalism or consumerism in a space that invites us to decenter it. And I don't know, I'm there's something that I think is a connection point around what you were just saying, Lindsey, about like, I think sometimes we center an emotional response, like if we walked into a building that was falling down, or like the carpet was older, and yet what they were actually doing in the community was so profound that when do we trust our emotional responses versus kind of zooming out to the bigger picture of seeing what's actually going on? I don't know. I'm wrestling with that.
Yeah. I think that's a great question, because the thing around anger, right, I think that makes this story so striking is the way that dominant white Protestant Christian culture has taught us like anger is a bad thing. Don't keep your anger on the inside if you even get angry, which we advise that you shouldn't, but that it's bad, that it's shameful, that it's dangerous, right? And so we, in sort of like a binary way of processing the world, right? It's not like, think about when anger is good. Anger is always bad. Right. And so I think when we have been trained to accept that, right, we forget that anger doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Like you can examine why are you angry? What are the circumstances around you that's creating this response in you, right? Does the level of your anger match what's going on, And so I think part of this text, especially for folks in privileged spaces, is like sort of a model. Jesus shows us that there are things worth being angry about, and B, that some of those things, in some of those cases, especially when we're talking about oppression, exclusion, and forced poverty, essentially, like expressing that anger is an act of resistance, is an act of a faithful act to have a public expression of anger. But I think that's all rooted, especially for privileged folks, in like, we have to develop this ability to self-reflect, to look at the world and have an analysis of what's going on, instead of just saying yes or, like, oh, it's anger, get rid of it.
Right. Or my anger is justified above and beyond anyone else's experience. Like, yes, I don't want to wear a mask. I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm angry. I can't breathe when I wear a mask. Like all the righteous anger that is so self-centered. Righteous in quotes, like supposedly
self-righteous,
self-righteous anger that is self-centered. I don't know. I guess I'm in what's been coming up for me in the past couple of weeks, especially, is experiencing an emotional reaction or receiving one from someone else. And there's the surface level of it, but then also what you're asking us to do is like, okay, what's underneath that? What are some of the conditions that might have caused that emotional reaction? That the surface level of the emotion is not always the truth, but there's something else underneath it that might be more revealing. So like, why is, if we're reacting to Jesus's anger in an offended way and not looking at, well, why is Jesus angry? What is he reacting to? What is he experiencing? What is he trying to say? I think that there's an invitation here from Jesus where we actually have the beauty of zooming out. We are zoomed out. We are not in the temple experiencing this firsthand. And by the way, he's not shouting at the money changers necessarily. I think he's shouting at the religious leaders who allowed the money changers in the first place. He says, take these things out of here, which I think is dual, talking to both the physical people who were doing it, but those who allowed that to happen in the temple. And again, I think being able to see this is a template for us as we're navigating emotions from ourselves or our families or people around us. I think the pandemic has also revealed, we're sometimes alone with our emotions. We're sometimes like leaking out emotions sideways because we can't actually exert any control on the thing over here. I don't know. It's been an interesting experience these past few months in this. There's fewer outlets for emotion. And I don't know. I don't think we talk about that enough.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, I don't know if this is a general thing or from my formation growing up, right? I somehow was socialized to understand that emotions are instantaneous, like they're momentary reactions, right? And maybe that's because emotions in my family of origin were big and explosive and like that. But but the idea of like the real experience in the world, right? That our emotions sort of build and they are with us. We carry them with us if we cannot express them in a healthy way. I think is also present in the text, but to your point, like makes the whole like isolation piece of our experience right now all the more complex, right? Because now we have nothing but time with our feelings, and some of us it's just us and our feelings, like in the house. But also, like, if we sort of have been used to ignoring our feelings or understanding them as reactionary moments, right? Then it's getting flipped on us. And I think that's, that's something to attend to. That's something to think about. And I think in this passage in John, another interesting thing that struck me is that Jesus braids the whip, right? Like, and now I'm not a whip expert. I don't have a lot of animal driving experience, but in my mind, it takes more than a minute to make a whip, right? So Jesus, like the anger, a braided whip at least, or, it's not like he picked up a thing and just started wielding it. So like Jesus' anger is such that I'm just imagining him in the corner, like, this, I don't want to curse on the podcast, but like these mofos up in here, braiding up the whip, like that to me speaks of not that this is like a reactive blow up, but like there's some thought and intention, right? Jesus, and like, we don't know, who's to say that this wasn't a planned, that Jesus didn't plan this, right? When he's coming into Jerusalem, he knows where he's going. He knows what's going to happen, right? He's been practicing this faith and celebrating this holy day his whole life. So I think there's something about recognizing, right, that this isn't happening in the way that anger often gets cast, as like a thoughtless explosion reaction. But this is for me, I would liken it to the experience in my community of like compounding generational, like thing after thing after thing that oppression is putting on us, right? And what that anger looks like after you carry it around for years and generations.
I really appreciate you pulling attention to that. And it's funny, right as you were saying, making, of course, my brain was starting to noodle it. And it's interesting if we juxtapose with other Passovers, or as Jesus is coming into Jerusalem for the final time, when he asked people to go and get a colt and a donkey, go find these things. But here Jesus is intentional about making it, that he himself is the one to braid it together. And I mean, just building off what you were saying, I mean, and we talked about earlier on the legacies, the compounding oppressions, the compounding legacies of anger. This braiding action to me also feels like a weaving of resilience, of oppression and horrific experiences. Like they all go together to be the cord, the whipcord of, this is what helps me persevere and change and challenge systems. That anger that is holy in some ways, of like, I think there is a lot of truth from our emotions. It may not always be the first truth of, like, I'm angry about being cut off in line, for example. That's what I feel angry about. But the deep truth, the abiding truth of that anger around the systems that need to change. And I think part of what we're invited to, especially as white folks, is in listening to that the truth of that anger, the breadth of that anger, the generations of that anger, to recognize, whoa, my understanding of the world has been constructed very narrowly based on my experience as a person, afforded great privilege and not put in these sort of situations. I know for me, conversations around abolition, were first brought to me by Black trans folks in conversation with the group that I got to be a part of as a trans person. I 5 years ago or 4 years ago was like, I don't know what this means. It was my first time at the temple. It was my first time experiencing that kind of conversation in that way. And but receiving the anger of the injustice of policing and imprisonment and our prison industrial system took me a minute to sort through and be like, yeah, no, that's an anger I receive. And I want to, whatever I can braid into that cord of, we need to change this system, I'm here. And what are we making together as abolitionists, as liberationists, to help transform these systems? I don't know. I think there's an invitation in, like, the weaving of emotion and craft and this long game of change. To me, again, this text, I don't know if I'd expected to have that come out of this text, but your conversation has really revealed that to me.
Yeah, and that whip is, that weaving, right, is resistance. Like, that's what we are talking about when we use the word resistance, right? Because to me, I think in the frame of abolition, right, we have these two movements, and it really in the frame of any kind of anti-oppression resistance, right? There's the tearing down, the destruction of the tools that are meant for our destruction, right? The tools that are dehumanizing us. And then there's the imagining and creating of something new. And so I think that part of what Jesus shows us, and what communities of resistance for generations have been showing us, right? Especially Black and Brown communities, especially the trans community, right? Is that this resistance, or this tearing down, is sacred work, is holy work, and has power to invite other folks in, right? And to liberate us, I would say both oppressed and oppressor, to liberate us to feel our anger at injustice, to liberate us to do the work, the holy and sacred work of tearing down, which is in the Bible. Let's not pretend that it isn't, because folks get so upset about property destruction, shall we say. which is exactly what Jesus is doing here, right? So that I really like your point of like the weaving into, what is your weaving into resistance going to look like? Whomever you are, wherever you are.
Okay, I think that is a beautiful segue to our second reading. And we're already talking about it, so we won't spend as much time on it maybe, but this nuancing resistance beyond some sort of one action. I want to hold that as we move into the second reading. And so the second question that we explore together is, how does this text call us to resistance? We might have a few instances of that here. And I actually found the version from the Common English Bible. I'd be happy to read it through the second time to see how word differences might reveal more for us. So I will read John 2, verses 13 to 22. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. He found in the temple those who were selling cattle, sheep, and doves, as well as those involved in exchanging currency sitting there. He made a whip from ropes and chased them all out of the temple, including the cattle and the sheep. He scattered the coins and overturned the tables of those who exchanged currency. He said to the dove sellers, "Get these things out of here. Don't make my Father's house a place of business." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Passion for your house consumes me." Then the Jewish leaders asked him, "By what authority are you doing these things? What miraculous sign will you show us?" Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up." The Jewish leaders replied, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But the temple Jesus was talking about was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered what he had said, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. What is our call to resistance from this text?
I was really struck this reading, by when Jesus says, "Destroy this temple and I will raise it in 3 days." Which, John is so helpful. The writer of John is so helpful, right? He's like, by this, Jesus meant this, like cliff notes of John, or footnotes. But I also think about so to me, in that there's a seed of like death and resurrection, right? Jesus is talking about he's going to die and be raised again. And I think thinking about Jesus' body as a metaphor that we later take as the church, as us, right? That we are Jesus' body, or even to extend that metaphor beyond the church, right? Jesus says the reign of God is among us. It's when you're together in community, right? And so thinking about this death and resurrection mode of like, we're in a moment where we talk a whole lot about the institutional church dying. And some of us get really excited about what, because we believe in the resurrection, because, it's not just that this particular institution that we're familiar with will die, but that we believe that the Church of Jesus Christ will be reborn and be made new. And I think that, extending that as like, that's the core teaching of our faith, right? So thinking about that as our ethic of life in the world, right? That there is a cyclical nature to the life that God ordered and created, that things die, people die, institutions die, our projects, have a lifespan, but then something new, rebirth, comes afterwards. And I think, to me, that is also at the core of this abolition movement, right? The old way needs to die and a new thing is going to be born. A new way of creating community safety is going to be born. A new way of taking care of our neighbors is going to be born. A new approaches to mental health are going to be born if we can let these old killing ways that are killing us, die, if we can tear them down. And so I think, to me, part of the call that I hear in this text today is let's really start living like we believe that, like we believe in death and resurrection. Like, what does it mean if I start filtering my thoughts and plans and decisions about how I'm going to show up in community through that lens, through an abolition lens is what I want to call it. And then what actions can follow, right? So I feel this call to like shift my thinking, but then also let's get this Good Friday to Easter Sunday thing rolling. Like let's get to some of the things that need to die, and let's get to the imagining of what God will bring forth through our communal creativity.
Yeah, I love that. And what I noticed similarly was Jesus said, destroy the temple and in 3 days we'll raise a new one. Meanwhile, they had been working on this construction for 46 years, which, my God. But to me, it's like how quickly the new thing can come through. This is, which makes me think the seeds of it are already here. That if we were just open to letting the old thing die, to raising the structures to the ground, the seeds of what can come have already been planted, such that in just 3 days, whatever that is, if we are willing to sit through Holy Saturday, if we're willing to sit through, I don't know what will come of this, then the new thing is ready to spring forth. If we just let the sun do its thing, and the rain, and the elements of the communities that have been figuring this out for a very long time. I just learned a history of a community outside of Asheville. It was near Hendersonville, and right after emancipation, former enslaved folks came to this section of land and took it over and created a farming community and created like an intentional community of formerly enslaved folks. And it was going great. And then white people got pissed about it because they were thriving. I mean, how many times is that damn story? I'm going to cuss on this podcast, replayed over and over again. And I look to that as a seed of what real community care can look like, such that no one went hungry. Everyone had something, a place to live, something to eat, education, community, nurture, family. It wasn't perfect, but it was a model of something that I think has been replicated in different parts of the world and different places across this country. As it's not some sort of abstract idea for what an abolitionist way of life is. We're not suddenly like sci-fi creatures. I mean, maybe we could be, but if we let people's imaginations grow. But these are very tangible things, and I love that in the temple, the things that they're selling and buying are cattle, sheep, and doves. Like I was also struck by the very just like how messy is that inner like outer ring of the temple with all those darn farm animals and doves and things there. And I think like, what would it look like? Maybe people do need cattle, sheep, and doves, but do we have to sell them like that? Like, how can we help people get what they need for their families and for the broader community that isn't premised on this capitalist idea or financial model? Anyway, so the 3 days made me just like, what if we believe that the thing is already here and it's so close at hand that we don't have to wait 50 years for it to come through if something were to die?
Yeah, absolutely. And because I do believe that alternative ways of living and building just and peaceful communities are here. Like, what does it mean for the majority of us if that resurrection way, if those seeds don't come from us, right? If the
Mm-hmm.
good news doesn't come from us, is it still good news to us? Do we still want to be saved by it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think one of the tricks um, of white supremacy and capitalism and all of the stew of garbage that our culture is formed in. One of the tricks is like, if we didn't do it, we don't want it. So if we're not centered, right? Whiteness, straightness, wealth, if we're not centered, then we don't want to be saved by it. And so we have folks who are willing to vote against their own self-interest. We have folks that are willing to literally die because the idea that would save them came from communities of color or people who they think are different than them, right? And so I think the pertinent question for a lot of Christians, mainline Protestant Christians, is do we still want to be saved by something that is not by us or about centering us, right? Because you're right, and in communities all over the place, but usually that have been made marginal, right? But they exist everywhere. People are living in different ways, and it's not hard to make the transition if you just have the will to make the transition, right? Like, it's not like we need 46 years of brainstorming to figure out what is going to happen. We need to listen to the people who are already living in a new reality.
Yeah. And just to underscore Jesus's point, that way is embodied. It's from the bodies. It's from the temple of the body.
Yeah.
That is what is being saved, not this structure, not this building. That our bodies are saved,
right,
by a new way of living. And would we be brave enough to risk death to receive it? And the death of our ideas, I think, is more apt. Like the death of the way especially whiteness has constructed the world. And I just wish there was a way people who are so in that fear place of what that could mean could partake of the cup and bread to realize it is not that scary. It is actually profoundly beautiful. You needn't live in fear of that death.
And more free, better, like qualitatively better than you are living right now. And not better because you have more stuff that you can call yours, not better because you have more ill-gained power in the world as an individual, but better in your spirit, better in your heart, better for the health of your body, better in terms of being free and being free together.
Yes. That is the sweetness that we can, that is what God is calling us for in the kingdom, is to experience that level of liberation and freedom and beauty and community and being braided together in a new way.
Yes.
Shall we move to our third reading and realize we're I don't care about time, but we perhaps some of us do have other things we have to do today, but I'd love to move into the third reading around a vision for the work of abolition that this text might call us to. And Lindsey, would you be willing to read it for us again?
Yep. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these out of here. Stop making my father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken.
What is the vision for the work of abolition you see in this text?
I think for me, it's still sticking around this death and resurrection piece. But also I think thinking a little bit outside the text about who Jesus was in the world and where he's coming from and where he's going to, says something to me about who wields or who controls the whip, the resistance, the movement. That, you know, I think in this moment, there are a lot of folks who are becoming newly awakened to all sorts of things, right? All sorts of movement for justice things, but also abolition. And I would think of myself as someone who is new to the movement, right? I'm trying to do my best to learn from those who have been working on this for a long time. And especially from, you know, the abolition movement is born of Black women, right? And trying to not just insert myself in like, now I see what's going on, here's what we should do, right? Right. But that, like, I'm not the one who gets to wield the whip, even though I really would love if there was an opportunity in my life to flip some tables someday. That's not actually my role. And so thinking about that Jesus was a person who was directly affected. Jesus was who the Romans were killing, were threatening, were extorting, were dehumanizing. That's his community. That's who and where he came from. He's the one who's leading this movement. And I think similarly, for me, I see in this text a model that the work of abolition needs to be led by the folks who are most affected by the terror, the empire's terror of imprisonment and policing, right? So that doesn't mean, right, that I'm not there, that I don't show up, right? But it does mean that I'm not running the show. And even as a pastor of a church who's going to educate people, I feel called to educate people about abolition, right? I'm still not. There's never going to be a point where I'm at the microphone, at the front of the march, wielding the whip. Like, that's not my job. So I think there's something about maybe that I've extrapolated in my listening to the text about like the role of being in support, of being a follower, of being a learner, even while there's something in me that wishes to be the one wielding the whip.
That's so powerful. It makes me imagine the scene a bit differently than I maybe had before.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was able to carry out the action of doing all this, driving people out, overturning tables, etc. And I imagine, the first time a money changer's table is turned over or a cattle is driven from the temple, which must be so loud, wouldn't whatever the temple guards come running and like, what is this disturbance?
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine, are the disciples locked arms in a ring around Jesus and the marketplace to allow this action to unfold? And in the work of protest, there are, which to me, this is a very powerful protest. Like you said, a planned action, not just a one, like, oh, he got angry just because, but he thought about this in advance. And I imagine he talked to the disciples about it in advance, and others who might form a blockade or, and so, yeah. And there's so many other ways for us to be involved besides being at the microphone, besides, for those of us who are not, who are trying to follow. I think a friend of mine taught me early about the beauty of fellowship and how that is a calling to follow those who are leading these movements for justice because of their impacted identities. And the thing that I noticed is who destroys the temple. In verse 19, Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." I had always, I think, added, or I think in other texts, maybe it's like God will destroy the temple. Like, who's destroying what? But here it's like, no, you destroy it. To me, it's like it's an invisible subject. You do the action, and then Jesus and God, however we want to see that divinity, it helps raise it. So I think this is an invitation to participation, not passive observation, that we will wait till the temple's destroyed, and then we can get active around abolition and liberation. But actually, we're called to be part of this sacred movement for what will be destroyed.
That's so interesting. That's such a great, like, now my mind is like, it's going in a lot of ways. Because when you first said that, I thought my initial response was like, oh, you have destroyed this, right? Like, it's your fault. You messed this up. But I think that's so real in terms of like how an institution falls, right? Like, some of the people are going to feel like this is a bad thing, and we did a bad thing, and it became destroyed. While other folks are like, this is a great thing because it's been needing to come down, and we didn't accidentally destroy this. We were in there actively taking it apart. And that I think that there will always be both the conflicting opinions, right? But in the end, it's going to be destroyed sooner or later. And for those of us who find ourselves in the actively taking it apart group, right, we hope it's sooner. But however you come to that space, right? However it gets destroyed, it's coming down, and there will be something that comes. Like, Jesus will rebuild it, right? Jesus didn't say, destroy this temple and feel shame about it, and then I'll raise it, right? Or destroy this temple, and I'm gonna be mad because you didn't do it sooner, but I'm still gonna raise it up, right? There is really, I think, I'm just I'm not good at thinking and talking at the same time, clearly, but
I disagree.
my brain is just like, wow, like there will always be, right, like apologists and people who are trying to maintain, and in the end it's just going to be destroyed, so that it can be born again, and that's just the way of it.
Yeah, what if we take that as the truth? The truth is not that there's one truth, but like one of the truths is that whatever we build will be destroyed. Like we cannot hold on to it in perpetuity. That like there have been whole systems created for the everlasting, like this this law means you can pass your land down. This law means the divine right of kings will go through this family. We're obsessed with forever and ever. And what I hear in your noticing is that no matter our emotions about the system, whether we wish it would last forever or we wish it would come down tomorrow, the truth that God is revealing to us is that there is a cycle. I mean, I think indigenous communities have a whole theology about cyclical like patterns of nature and the beauty of destruction and rebirth. Why don't we pay attention to those too? Of I don't know, I think that like there's something in this that we've been grappling with around what do our emotions reveal? What do they conceal? And despite our individual feelings about it, what is the communal feeling? How do we discern in community? This is something that we talk about a lot in the work of evolving churches to be more inclusive, that no matter whenever you adopt your welcoming statement or make a change to your bathroom or like whatever the visible or tangible action is, there's a whole range of people that'll have feelings about that. There are people who are going to love it. There are people who are going to hate it. The hope is, even if they hate it, they're willing to stay and experience it for a few months so that their fear of whatever in the heck they think is going to happen won't happen, unfortunately, maybe, but like that they can actually receive the change. And I think that is, to me, what you're also calling us to is if we center the truth of destruction and rebirth from chapter 2 on, that is what it means in the life of faith, then how does that open us to different kinds of imagining and living?
Yeah. And I think also letting go of this obsession that we have with eternal things that we create lasting forever, right? Like we have taken the idea of eternity, right, and raised it to I'm going to say a heretical level. Like I don't have any authority to say who's a heretic or not, but like just an idolized level, right? Like we want everything around us to last forever. And there's all sorts of like literature about why that's a bad idea and stories and movies, right? But I think in a very practical way, when we talk about, well, first of all, I think learning to let go of that a little more can help us in every realm, as you're saying, right? Like, why did we latch on to in Jesus we get to live forever, and then totally let go of the cyclical nature of life, that after every death there's a resurrection, which is a better promise in my view, right? But I think in a very practical way, when we're talking about the work of abolition, right? Like this is the argument that always shows up. Like we can't defund the police. We can't not have police anymore. This is a thing which we want to last forever. And in our idolizing of that, especially in white communities, we pretend like it has been from forever, right? Like we've always had police and that's kept us safe. has it though? Have we? So no, the answer is no. Just don't want to leave that one hanging out there. So like this movement away, like what would it be? How would it help our imagining? How would it help our bringing forth something new if we could start letting go of this idea that everything has to live forever? Or that all our things, because we're not really concerned about other people's theologies, ideas, ways of constructing community, but all our things in white America have to live forever.
Right. Ooh. What if salvation is not the promise for eternal or everlasting life, but salvation is about being braided into the cycle of life, that we are promised rebirth in our own lifetimes, our physical life on earth, we will experience rebirth and what feels like death, the facing of the pain, the wound we thought we never could. If we tried to imagine it beforehand, that we will survive and something new will spring up in us if we let it. I'm really feeling called that the vision for the work of abolition is centering what has caused death, centering the reality of our need to face death, face fear, and holding to that promise that I know there's something else. I mean, I know there's something else possible. I know that we can survive that transition into what is next, and not just survive, but that is what will allow us to thrive.
Yeah, that it will be life-giving. Mm-hmm. I agree. That's it. I don't need to add anything to that summary. That's what I'm feeling.
Which, I mean, I just want to offer, and then we can wrap, but yeah, I mean, just again, to work against that tendency to believe abolition is far away and liberation is far away. Yeah. But it's chapter 2. Like, let's bring it to now, as the precursor, and living in an abolitionist way. What would that call us to right now? If that's the story we want told about our lives, like how would our biographers, God, like pull something and say, actually, that's how they always lived, or that's what kind of like prefigured the rest of their time on earth. Let's not save the best for last. Let's do what needs liberating now.
Yeah. And can that thought process help us to ask some questions, like not what could this be one day, but like what would it take right now in my life? What would it take in my neighborhood to change policing? What would it take in my church to change the way we show up in the community? Right. And start, even if it takes many steps, right? Those are steps that we can imagine right now and start working towards.
That's right. And that's, I think, what our kind of group has really seen for ourselves. It's like, wait, we don't have to wait. We can start. We can help. We can lock arms and push the guards back as far as we can, to allow for those who have been braiding their cords for a long time to actually demonstrate for us what needs overturning.
Yeah. Yep. And then we can follow.
That's right.
Fellowship. I like that.
Fellowship.
It's my catchword for this week. I'm taking it with me.
Yeah, you can thank Trina Olson, who taught me that word. The way we close our practice is to just name for us what we want to take with us as a result of this conversation. I think you were starting into that. And so anything else you want to add to?
I'm taking fellowship. I will use it. I will credit Trina at least the first time.
Yeah, that's all.
And I think I also just, what I really appreciate and find so inspiring and motivating about the work of abolition is how it feels expansive to my spirit. Like it feels liberating just to say, this isn't the way that things have to be. And we can create and imagine something better. And I think it's a similar kind of expansiveness and liberation that I feel in the claim of our faith that death is not the end, right? That there's resurrection. And so I just want to take that feeling with me, speaking of thinking through our feelings, right? I want to take that feeling and spirit of possibility. I want to hold on to the like openness of imagining and of hearing and listening to other people's imaginings, and the creativeness that is born of that free, open space. So I'm going to take all those feelings and keep them with me so that they can hold up and strengthen my actions.
That's right. Yeah. Because those feelings, those feelings, those sensations, that is what, if others can taste that, can experience that, it's an embodied reality, then it helps push against the fear that will come when things start to die. It is scary. We don't have to pretend it's not.
Right.
There is a Holy Saturday, and it means not knowing what comes next. And so, but if we can remember those moments of expansion and love and community that promise something else on the other side, then we're able to get through it and navigate through it. Hold strong against it. I love that. I think I'm taking with me this the braiding of the cord and being braided into something as a reminder that, again, it's not all up to one person. It's not all up to us. It's especially that self-centered feeling or self-isolation feeling that can, the dual sides of that coin that I think whiteness invites us or coaxes us into. But the reminder of being braided into movements with others that we may follow, that we may show up for and with, and I think is a testament to what abolition ultimately is calling us to. Is the wall, some of the walls that we take down are those that have put cages around humans and cages around our ideas and our communities, and that this is a new vision of being braided together in a different way. I'm gonna make me a friendship bracelet. I'm pretty sure that's what's gonna happen.
I love it. That's everyone's application activity for the week. After this Sunday school lesson, make a friendship bracelet.
I'll send you one. This has been just a fabulous, imaginative, liberative conversation, as they always are when we get together. And I appreciate you, Lindsey, and the communities that you support and dream with, and how those dreams are braided into the larger world that you get to move into. And I'm just grateful for you and what you bring.
Thank you. And I so appreciate you inviting me to be here, and also all of the work you do, but especially here on the podcast, lifting up so many wonderful, wise voices of our friends and colleagues. This is a great soul feeding work. So thank you for doing that.
I feel lucky. Oh, well, thanks, y'all. We will be back starting on Tuesdays through the rest of Lent. We got folks lined up that we're excited to chat with, and we'll keep exploring abolition. And in the meantime, be well, and we'll see you next week. All right, take care, y'all.
Bye.